Good afternoon, you're tuned into The Download here on 91.7 FM. I'm Chris May, and today I've got a very special treat in store. Renowned bassist Leland Sklar has recorded on literally thousands of recordings, working with artists such as James Taylor, Phil Collins, Linda Ronstadt, Reba McIntyre, and countless others. His style and groove are unmistakable, and the songs he's contributed to are truly timeless. Take a listen.
Now I know that I'm too young. My life has just begun. Sussudio.
Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way you feel.
And when the night wind starts to sing a lonesome lullaby, it helps to think we're sleeping underneath the same big sky. Somewhere out there.
Best known for his legendary contribution with his bass playing on literally dozens of hit records, as well as several film scores, Leland Sklar joins us by phone from Los Angeles, California. Lee, it's such an honor to have you on the show, man.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
This has been great. I've really been looking forward to this, and of course, we've gone back and forth. I think for a couple of months trying to get this lined up. In fact, it's funny. I'd mentioned to a few people who are non-musicians that I was going to be conducting this interview, and of course, they all know your songs that you've played on, and a couple of them recognized your name, but all of them, of course, recognized your face and that iconic white beard that you sport.
That used to be brown.
Yeah. That's really become a staple with your image, though, and almost an iconic look. Is that something that was sort of...
Nothing premeditated. I was just too lazy to shave, and it turned into...
How many years has it been since you've shaved that? I don't think I've ever seen a picture of you.
No, I think the last time I actually saw myself clean-shaven was when I got my high school diploma in '65.
Oh, boy.
I mean, I've cut it and
Yeah.
done different things with it, but that was the last time I ever actually was clean shaven.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great. Well, I do want to. I want to go back a little bit, kind of chronologically. I know that you were born in the Midwest, back in Milwaukee, in the late '40s. What was your musical childhood like before you moved west?
Well, my family moved to LA when I was 4. So pretty much, LA really is my home. I mean, I was born in Milwaukee, but I really hadn't accomplished a great deal by the time we moved here.
Right.
But shortly after moving to Los Angeles, we had a piano in the house, and as a child, I used to kind of be enamored with the Liberace show on television. My folks loved it, and I'd watch it, and I thought it was pretty great, and fell in love with the piano. And seeing as there was one in the household, I started taking lessons and took to it very, very quickly, and pretty much was a classical student at that point in my life. I mean, I started out with incredible rudimentary stuff like everybody, but next thing I knew, within a few years, I was doing a lot of recitals and playing a lot of classical music.
That's great. Now, were your folks musical, or was it more something that they kind of...
My mom could play a little piano, and my dad honked a bit on the saxophone. But for the most part, they weren't musicians, but they had incredibly eclectic musical taste and exposed me to a great deal of different kinds of music. So I felt very fortunate that I grew up in a household where music was a very important part of our lives. It was always music on the hi-fi and stuff.
Sure. I mean, what were you listening to? What did you gravitate toward personally in terms of stuff that was maybe your folks were playing and that kind of thing, or whatever was on the radio?
Pretty much classical. I mean, it was from very classical, Mozart and Chopin, to Copland and Gershwin, and contemporary jazz and things like Martin Denny and the Hi-Los and George Shearing, and things like that. So, I mean, it was pretty eclectic, but there was a good variety in the household.
Yeah. When did Top 40? I mean, the whole Top 40 thing and pop records and that kind of thing. Was that something that you? Let's shift a little bit. Actually, you eventually studied at Cal State Northridge.
Yeah.
Where you, of course, eventually met James Taylor. Talk about that a little bit and your musical education and how you kind of shifted over to bass and scoring and really your career?
Well, first off, I really haven't scored any movies. I've worked on hundreds of movies as a bassist, but I haven't actually scored any.
Got it.
I was involved in. I'm still doing this all the time. We just worked on the new James Brown movie. There's a new Jimi Hendrix movie coming out that I played on, and so I'm still at it all the time. But I'm always there as one of the musicians and not as a composer. But because we did tons of television, did all of Mike Post's TV shows from Rockford Files to A-Team to Hill Street Blues to L.A. Law and Magnum PI and the A-Team, all those kind of shows.
So you were the guy.
But when I was my gravitation to bass took place in the 7th grade, where I arrived at Birmingham Junior High School. At that time, out in the San Fernando Valley, Birmingham was a 6-year school, both junior high and high school. And so it was interesting because you had the same teachers all the way through school. It wasn't like you changed schools and had a whole new group of faces to look at. You had the same bunch of characters through your entire experience.
Right.
But when I arrived in junior high school into the music class, I kind of assumed I would be playing piano. And Theodore Lynn, who was the music teacher, said, "We have tons of kids that play piano. We need a string bass player." And he said, I can give you some lessons on it to get you started. And he pulled out an old blonde K upright, and I grabbed. He showed me how to hold it. I put it up against me, plucked an E string, felt that vibration, and said, "I dig this."
Yeah,
absolutely. And started studying, and pretty much left piano at that point and focused entirely on bass. And did that all through junior high and high school, but still kind of as a jazz classical musician. I wasn't that into Elvis or Bill Haley and the Comets or any of that kind of stuff. The thing that really twisted my head around was the English invasion when the Beatles hit, and so many groups that came out of that period really made me rethink things. And eventually, my dad took me and we bought an amp and an electric bass because I was only playing upright, and that was arduous when you'd get into a rock band. You'd be bleeding just trying to be heard. Mm-hmm. And so I changed over to electric at that point, and then all through junior high, high school, and in through college, I was always in bands. I mean, sometimes 4 or 5 bands at a time, and we'd play parties, we'd play clubs, we'd play the teen center, and
sure,
all those gigs that everybody does when they're getting started with this stuff.
Right.
And towards the end of the '60s, I was in a band called Wolfgang, and through kind of almost like a Kevin Bacon kind of 6 degrees of separation, one of the guys had a friend who had a friend, and that friend had a friend named James Taylor. And James had just come back from England where he recorded his Apple album, and he came by the rehearsal and was hanging out, and we hit it off, but I never thought about it. The guy, he played a couple of tunes, and we went, "Oh, this guy's great." Mm-hmm. But we had expectations of the band doing something, and the band was not that kind of music. We were much more hard rock band. And but then when Fire and Rain was released, James got an opportunity to play at the Troubadour in L.A., and through having met him, Peter Asher, who was producing him, contacted me and asked if I'd play this gig with him. And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to. It'd be great." And at that point, I had left Wolfgang for various reasons, and we played the gig, and it went great. It was fun, but then he got called to come back, and suddenly, like, his picture was on the cover of Time magazine, and
right.
There was a paradigm change in the
up.
whole music scene, and James was at the forefront of it. And I had met Russ Kunkel back when he was in a group called Things to Come back in 1968, and suddenly he and I were thrust together with James and became this kind of an iconic rhythm section. It's really amazing. And Peter said, "Look, James has offered to go on the road for a month," and I said, "Let's do it." And I walked out of college after 5 years, no degree.
Oh, my
Just
goodness.
kept changing majors
Which
and
is
stuff.
typical,
I was an
yeah.
art science major.
Right.
And went on the road and never looked back. And it's turned into the last 45 years of my life.
Yeah, you mentioned, and I was going to get to that, just the chemistry that you guys had rhythmically. I wanted to talk a little bit on some of those early albums. One thing that I always have really appreciated about that rhythm section on a lot of James Taylor's early work is just the unpredictability. You know, where you would land, where the groove would fit, even the drums, or if it was a percussion. It just was different. It was nice. It was tasty. It was unpredictable. How much input did you guys have in collaborating with
we
that?
had. I mean, in terms of what we did, we had all the input. I mean, we weren't really given any direction. James would sit and play a song, and Russ and I and Cooch or Carole King when she was playing piano with us, or when Craig Durgee joined, we would pretty much come up with our own parts on all these songs. For me, it was always quite difficult from the standpoint that James, as a guitarist, is an incredibly comprehensive musician. He always has his thumb always playing like moving bass parts. He plays rhythmically, but then his finger picking is melodic. He's one of the most underrated guitar players to me in the world. He's because guys I know that are guitar players, they always just go, "Man, I've been tried so hard to cop his style, man. It's just like it's just so unique to him."
It was rooted in
but
him,
it required us to find notes to play that he wasn't already doing, and so we would end up with far more, maybe for me, more melodic things or quirkier parts because he already had the basic parts covered, and it required a different mindset.
Sure.
And Russ and I, for some reason, there was an instant chemistry between us. We just locked in, and nothing premeditated. Never really had to talk about things. We just somehow, as different as we both are as people, as soon as the red light would turn on, we would kind of meld into a third person that was both of us.
Yeah, when you guys would work on an album, I mean, how long would it take in the early 70s? I mean, how long would it take you guys to go in and put together an entire album when you do sessions?
God, that's hard to say because there were so many aspects of it. I mean, you could literally be in the studio for a few weeks to a month.
Yeah.
There was there were budgets, so everybody wasn't sitting there looking at the clock, kind of tapping their fingers going, come on, guys. Mm-hmm. We really could experiment with lots of things. On one of James's albums, he wanted the background vocals. There was a specific line. I forget what song it was on, but there was a specific line that he wanted to have a different quality to it. So he sang the line. We recorded it, reversed the tape. He wrote it all out phonetically, recorded it phonetically backwards, and then when they ran the tape the other way, you could understand the words, but all the inflections were very bizarre. And that took like 2 days to really make that right. And that's 2 days that nowadays nobody, unless you're a band that's really got a serious budget, or you're just doing something in somebody's house and there is no pressure time-wise or budget-wise. But we got to do a lot of things in those days that went on for a while. When we did Jackson Browne's first record, it went on for a long time because we would cut songs and then Jackson would listen to them for a while and say, "Oh, let's try this again, maybe do that." Right. And sometimes we would end up going back to the initial stuff we had, but it afforded you the luxury of experimentation.
Absolutely. Yeah, music has changed so much. I wanted to get to that a little bit later, but the industry is just so different. And then the whole model, the whole business model has just changed.
I'm not going to say it's over. It's different.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but I wanted to ask you, and this kind of, when you look at your career, and I wanted to get into some of the other artists that you've worked with, but how much of what you learned, and because obviously a lot of the work, it sounds like with James Taylor and with some of the guys that you were working with there, really was a bit of a challenge because it was different. It's like you said, there was a different mindset. Do you feel that it really shaped the musician that you became later on in terms of contributing parts and your efforts to the rhythm section with a lot of the other artists that you recorded with?
Yeah, I mean, I think every time you pick up the instrument, it shapes another aspect of you. kind of no matter what kind of project you're working on, every time you're playing, it opens up another little synapse maybe and adds to your repertoire. Certainly, when I started working with James, I found myself working in a style of music that I really wasn't normally listening to.
Mm-hmm.
So it really made me come to it with a different set of ears, and the fact that I came to it from a different direction made it function in a different way than it would have had I been like just a folkie.
Absolutely.
So I think it was kind of like the perfect storm when all that came together.
Yeah.
It was like all the right guys at the right time, and it just had this freedom to become something unique that wasn't there before.
It sounds like the differences too really made up the ingredients for what made it successful ultimately, because you got to bring your own piece. Everybody got to bring their own piece, and then it made this entire pie, if you will, that it was just perfect. I mean, it was for what it was.
Well, we weren't sitting there reading music. We weren't sitting with charts and notation and arrangements ahead of us. We literally would come in a room and be it James or Jackson or whoever we were working with during those kind of sessions, they would sit down and play their song for you on piano or guitar, and you would start listening to it and then find your parts and then start recording. And generally, for whatever reason, the chemistry was there and it came together in a really unique and special way.
Yeah. That's awesome. Many of the other artists you've worked with, I'm just going to rattle off a few. Of course, Phil Collins, I want to get to in a minute. Reba McIntyre, Clint Black, Richard Marx, you mentioned Jackson Browne, Linda Ronstadt. I'd love to hear some stories, and I do want to ask you first about your work with Phil Collins and what's currently going on with that, because I understand, at least it's been rumored, that maybe he's exploring the idea of going out live again. But talk about that period, because those first couple of albums when he broke away from Genesis, of course, were million sellers. I mean, they were iconic albums, and can you talk about that time period a little bit?
It was fabulous. I met Phil doing a Lee Ritenour record. It was one of Lee's solo records, and he hired me, and he hired Phil. I was aware of Phil through Genesis, and Phil was aware of me through basically my body of work with James and people like that. And we hit it off great, and he asked me to do his first tour with him, and I said, I can't believe this, but I was already going to be on the road with James Taylor at that time. And I said, man, I can't do it. But this was, I think, in 81 or 2, and it was after the Face Value album. And I said, but I'd love to get a chance to work with you at some point. And he called me again in 84, and I went to England, and we did the No Jacket Required album, and then in 85, we toured that album. Well, when we initially started that tour, it was a pretty small scale, kind of like the first tour that I couldn't do, where it's going to be theaters and smaller venues. Suddenly, Sussudio's released. It's like one of the biggest records in the world, and all of a sudden we're having to leave these little venues and playing arenas. And it was really a fascinating thing to be around because it changed so dramatically, so fast. And we went out on the road, did that, and then I came back and off of that tour. And then the next time I saw Phil was in 89 when we went in and did But Serious, and then toured almost for a solid year in 1990 doing that. And then he and I had a kind of not a parting of the ways, but we didn't work together in the 90s, and then he called me in like 2000 and asked if I would like to come back and start working again. And I said, sure, I'd love to. So we went in and did the first final farewell tour and the live album that went with that. And then shortly after that it was when he pretty much called it quits. He had a lot of things going on in his life, and he had 2 young sons, and he wanted to spend a lot more time with his kids and not, just be this kind of road dog forever. Right. And so he called it quits at that point, and it was a great run with him. But I loved working with Phil. His music, his work ethic, his energy, was some of the best I've ever been around in this business.
What were those records? What was it like putting those records together? I mean, were things charted out a little bit more specific?
No,
or
no, nothing. It was like, and generally, it was usually one guy at a time. They were pretty much constructed. He would put together demos, like he would have a click track and maybe some little drum parts that he had done, and he may not even have had lyrics to a song. He might have just been humming a melody, and we would have to come in and build off of that. And then as time went on, he would keep adding things and then add his drums later on in the project. And things like Sussudio, I think initially Sussudio was just one of these off the top of his head words he used, fully expecting to replace it later on.
Right.
And never came up with anything that worked as well, so he just left it.
But it's brilliant.
Yeah,
I mean, it's what makes it brilliant.
It's weird how things like that happen, but you also just have to be, brave and intuitive and just say, well, this is good, let's go with it.
Right. Absolutely.
But I love working with Phil.
So is he actually considering going back out on the road, or do you know, or can you talk about?
There's talk about it, but there's nothing's booked, nothing's really been discussed about it at this point as far as touring goes. There might be a little exploratory get-together just to see how it feels, but he's committed to absolutely nothing in terms of bookings or anything, and it's really in his corner. He doesn't need to do it. It's only if his ego demands that he wants to get back out and make music.
Right.
And it's really if he decides to do it and feels he's going to do it great, then I see no reason why he wouldn't do it. And if he doesn't feel it, then there's no reason to diminish his memory and history.
Sure.
So we're all hoping that maybe he'll decide to do something, but right now it's really I'm looking at a cloud.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So
another album, an artist that was really a great kind of a comeback album to pop for Linda Ronstadt was the "Cry Like a Rainstorm" album. I know she did several duets with Aaron Neville, and I know Brian Wilson contributed some backing vocals to the.
Well, I think when we did the track with Aaron, I think we did that at Ocean Way in Hollywood. I mean, I loved it. I mean, first off, to work with Aaron is such a treat. To be around this big dude who's got daggers tattooed on his face, yet he opens his mouth and this amazing angelic voice comes out.
Right.
It's pretty far out, to say the least. But Linda's always been, to me, one of the most gifted singers that pop music ever experienced.
Absolutely.
The most natural interpretations, and just her facility was exquisite to be around.
Yeah, it's really too bad. I don't know if you followed the news with Parkinson's, and she's been, she's not singing anymore.
I talk to her about weekly.
Oh, okay, great.
And I just did a gig up in San Francisco, and she came to the gig.
How's she doing?
She's doing, she's handling it the best she can.
Yeah.
It's not good. I mean, that kind of a diagnosis is never good, but she seems to be holding her own, and I think she just needed to pull away from commitments as a singer because it starts to affect your diaphragm and everything. And the expectations of her every time she opened her mouth were so high that at this point it's just best that she just goes on with her life and her kids and deals with just being a woman living in this world.
I saw a great little snippet of an interview that she did. I think it was on CBS or something. It was sometime in the last year, and she was talking. It was really neat the way that she explained it. I mean, the way that she's dealt with it. It's like, she has such a high integrity that she says, well, I'm not going to charge people for concert tickets if I can't deliver the best. If I can't really give them who they came to see. And I thought that,
Well, I think that's the way Phil's thinking at this point too. That he's decided that if he decides to do anything, he's not going to commit to doing anything unless he feels it's up to his standards.
Sure.
And his standards are incredibly high, and Linda's were incredibly high.
Absolutely.
And, it's easy to run out there and make a quick buck.
Yeah, right.
But then people walk away really sad.
Sure.
And there's really no reason to do that if you don't have to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So.
Let me ask you, any stories? I mean, I've mentioned a few of the. I mean, you've worked with so many artists. Anything that comes out that you think about, maybe that you haven't really, that nobody's ever asked you, anything behind the scenes or anything kind of fun or quirky, either recording or live with any of these guys that you go, oh man, there's this one time we went and we did this. Anything like that pops out to you?
Oh God, there were so many moments. One of the things that was fun was years ago we were working at A&M Studios on a singer from New York named Jimmy Carroll. And one of the songs, they really wanted an ambience to it that was kind of different than a studio vibe because it had kind of a real urban sort of quality to it. And we just said, well, why don't we just grab all the gear and let's go out in the parking lot, because it was right off of La Brea and Sunset in Hollywood. And we set up out in the parking lot and cut the track out there.
Oh, how funny.
And you heard road noise and horns honking and people talking.
It's so funny because it's such a great studio. And
yeah,
then you end up going
it's
outside.
Just great. It's like really, really fun. There's lots of moments that have taken place that if I talk about them, then I have to kill myself.
You'd have to,
somebody will kill me.
Somebody will come after you. Yeah. One last question before we wrap it up. What would you like to be best known for in 50 years?
I kind of don't really care about. The only legacy I really think would be nice to know is that I was fortunate enough to play on music that brought pleasure to people. That's one of the things I've always loved about my job, is that I get to do something either recording or live that elevates a person's day. They might have a bad day at work or something, and they get in the car to drive home in a bad mood and turn on the radio, and maybe some of the stuff I was lucky enough to play on comes on, and they're chilled by the time they get home.
Absolutely.
And they're enjoying themselves, or they've had a rough day and they come to a show that you're doing live, and they have a great evening, and they leave just all the bad aspect of their day is behind them.
Sure.
I feel real fortunate to have been able to spend pretty much my entire career in that mindset.
Sure.
And it's pretty magical.
I'm one of those people that benefited. I mean, many times driving down the road, I'll hear something. A lot of times it's the James Taylor stuff that you've played on, and I'll hear a lick or something. Oh, that's Lee. And it's just great, and it always puts a smile on my face. And a lot of times I'll move around the dial if I'm driving down the freeway. But I've always inevitably with the James, especially with the James Taylor stuff, always listen to it from front to back, and it's just awesome. Well.
It's been great.
Absolutely. Well, you have a lot of people that you've influenced musically, myself included, and it's just great. What an incredible legacy. Lee Sklar, it is such an honor and a treat to have had you on the program today, and hopefully we can do it. We can do it again soon.
Anytime. It's my pleasure.
Okay, man. Take it easy.
Okay, you too.
Take care. We want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. I'm Chris May, and until next time, have a great week.